how does this relate to classical education? There's incredible amounts of overlap with classical education. Um, you know, emphasis on primary sources, digging into kind of deep historic questions that people have been asking for a long time. Um, the emphasis on dialogue and conversation. So it's not just the writing piece, but the in tutorial conversation. And one of the things actually that I see students developing through the tutorial, um, because you can't hide, that's one of the things, like you can't be in a class of 12 or 13 or 20 where you can be like, well, you know what? I don't know exactly what's going on here at this moment, so I'm just going to hide, right? You can't do that. So students learn a lot of poise, the ability to carry on an argument. So again, that's another point with kind of classical education, this idea of argumentation and rhetoric. Students learn poise and the ability to use language, not just in writing, but also in conversation. Um, and yeah, this is, I mean, you mentioned C.S. Lewis. This is how Lewis was educated. He was actually sort of home educated in the sense that his dad got him a tutor in uh, high school. He went to boarding school as well. Um, but yeah, this is the system that Lewis grew up in, and it is a system that produces quite a number of significant thought leaders and major figures because it's rigorous, um, but I think that it's also highly interpersonal. Very relational form of learning. So I think that in some sense, it's kind of like when I was thinking about it, I was like, I'm kind of amazed. I mean, in one sense, a lot of homeschool parents are already doing this. Like, it's not really. Um, so it's just that as a teacher, as a tutor, I come in and work with some high school kids. So it offloads some of that work from parents. But really, these kids, this is what they're doing in home education in many ways. It's just that we're sort of maybe systematizing it a little bit and adding some more rigor to some of the components like the regular essay writing. And I have heard some homeschool moms be like, it's great because it's hard for me to get my kids to write for me, because they don't finish it or, you add that external motivator to some extent. So, yeah, feel free to ask any follow-ups. That's like, I was a little rambly there.
No, 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 it's fine. So I want to make sure I understand in theory what's happening. So you want the children to wrestle with truth. You want them to think more outside of just the basic, like what color was the shirt or what was it,
Yeah.
right? Like you want them to infer, you want them to critically engage and think, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think I'm putting you on the spot because this seems to be your jam. So
Yeah.
let's do like a minute or a 2 minute role play. So
Yeah.
obviously you're
Yeah.
the tutor and I'm going
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
child. We can take anything, Chronicles of Narnia, history, you
Yeah.
choose. But like help me understand like some of the questions because I'm clear on
Yeah.
the process, but what are like some of those big ideas or
Yeah.
questions you would ask? Like, okay, so what's
Yeah,
our
that's
topic? What are we talking about?
yeah, that's great. Yeah. So the idea is that all of the questions that I come up with for my students are so at Oxford, and actually one of the things I'll back up real quick and then we'll do the
Sure.
role play.
Okay.
Um, is you actually teach how to analyze a question because and this is one of the things I found distinctive at Oxford versus like even at an American college was I think that in the American system, it's kind of like, here's your question, and we're really kind of pretty forgiving. At Oxford, they were not so much. If you didn't understand the question and didn't answer the question, they're kind of like,
What happened here?
what happened here? So analysis of question, yeah, this is great. So a lot of the questions are, yeah, they're big picture questions about key features of, let's take the Chronicles of Narnia. Um, there might be a question along the lines of how does Lewis bridge um, our world with another world? Might be, and so the student would have to think through how does Lewis do that in telling a story that feels not too fantastic, right? It feels believable, right? And by the end, you believe that there are these parallel worlds, right? And time isn't the exact same. So a question might be something like, yeah, how does Lewis uh, tell the story in such a way that it is, or to what extent does Lewis tell the story in such a way that it is believable?
Mhm.
Um, so that might be a question. Or Here's a question, might be a theological question if we were to approach it theologically, would be like, how does Lewis explain, or how does the death of Aslan parallel with um, uh, biblical portrayals of Christ's death, right? So I don't know,
Valerie.
you want to tackle, I've got you, there's two options. Uh, or we could tackle, let's see, Edmund, right? What is it that causes Edmund to betray his siblings, right? And so then you have to unpack what's going on inside. So there's some
Really just a
questions.
Turkish delight, or is there more to that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Why is it food? Yeah, I don't know. And so the student would take one of those and they'd write an essay. Um, and then we would talk about it. So I don't know, Ro, what do you pick a question?
All right, so let's talk about Aslan and the allegory of Christ's death.
Yeah, yeah. So um, m- y- you throw out a few things, I'll throw out a few things. So right, there's that he has to die. He has to die if Edmund is going to be okay, right? Is one of the things. So we have this clear idea of substitution. So we could talk about, maybe the student might talk about ideas of um, biblical passages of substitution, right? Say Isaiah 53. The student might they might write an essay where they're like, well, here we have Isaiah 53 seems this clear, like we were like this, right?
Mhm.
Um, all we like sheep have gone astray, turning to our own way. But the Lord has laid the iniquity of us on this guy, whoever this guy is in Isaiah 53, right? We find out later that it's Jesus. But this idea of substitution is very kind of clear. In the place of is language. I would expect my students in if they're unpacking Narnia, where is their language of in place of, right?
Mhm.
Um, and Aslan has this moment where the girls are kind of like, the scene right after he's resurrected. The
That
girls are like,
big
"Whoa,
bear
what's
ejaculating. Yeah.
happening?" And he unpacks. He explains it. So I would expect my students to, if they're going to write a real nice essay, that would be a key passage, right? And if they didn't, I would say, "Hey, you wrote a decent essay, but what about this section,
Yeah.
right?" Aslan actually explains that if he dies in the stead of, I can't remember the language now, if he dies in the stead of somebody willingly, if a victim willingly gives
Yeah.
himself for someone else, there's a deeper magic, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, so yeah, so substitution would be something that they could write about.
Awesome.
I'm
And
trying
then
to,
even the animal chosen, right? So we think of the Lion of Judah, or we think
yeah, oh yeah,
like,
that'd be great. Yeah, the Lion of Judah that conquers. Yeah, exactly.
okay.
That would be another great component.
No,
And
that's really good. We're pulling out the themes, and I love how you talked about the substitution, because sometimes I talk to my kids and I said, this was a shadow. Like when this happened to Joseph, do you remember
oh
anything
yeah,
similar happening to Jesus?
yeah,
When this happened to Jonah, how long was he in the belly of the fish? 3 days.
yeah,
Does
yeah,
that sound familiar with something
yeah.
else? Like, yeah, I really like that, how you bring that all together.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I had a student actually write a paper on that and did an excellent job. And actually, in Christian history, there are models of different ideas of sort of what the atonement involves. And I had the student in the question kind of think about some of these different models and see if they could figure out which model do you think Lewis is using. Um, and so I thought that was the student did a really good job on that. I kind of, yeah, distinctly remember that essay was a good one.
All right. So we talked about lifelong learning and how to curate that environment. And then we added a layer by talking about the biblical worldview, how
Yeah,
to make sure that kids don't just think, there's history over here, and there's science over here, and there's geography, but no, God is in the center. He's the creator of all these things, and how do
yeah,
all these things work to not only fulfill
yeah,
his purpose, but also for our benefit. And
yeah,
then we
yeah,
talked about the how. So you dig in and you wrestle with the truth and you ask these questions to promote the curiosity and the critical thinking. Let's
yeah.
talk a little bit about the what.
Okay.
So I know some of the things you are really passionate about would be like theology, early church history, and Greek. Let's start with Greek.
Okay.
I agree because I've had the conversation. Latin is a dead language. Why are we teaching Latin? And I'm like,
Yeah.
because 60% of English is Latin. And if you are going to be a doctor or a lawyer or
Yeah.
scientist, you probably want to know those Latin words. So
Yeah.
let's kind of dissect Greek. Why should a
Yeah.
child learn Greek?
Yeah. So I taught Greek for many years at a Christian liberal arts college. So, and I've definitely been through the ringer and done quite a bit of Greek at seminary and then some graduate studies. I would say you can make a lot of similar arguments that you would make with Latin, which
Okay.
is at the Renaissance and Reformation periods, Greek becomes very influential, um, particularly for the English language. So we have lots of um, English words that have their roots back in Greek, just like we do in Latin, particularly in fields like medicine. But there's other things. Actually, our word apologetics, take a theology term, comes directly out of the Greek for defense. Uh, and I think that in one sense, you could study almost any other language and get a lot of benefit from it because by looking at a different language, you look at a different grammatical structures and how words are put together, and it makes you more aware of how your own language works. Now, I think that one of the things, particularly in sort of the classical movement with regards to Latin and Greek, that's very valuable is aside from these two languages being incredibly influential, is that you get to sort of pair ideas about logic and rhetoric with these languages and see how some of these early writers are thinking about rhetoric and how you put words together in persuasive combinations. Um, and so I think that there's this kind of, on the one hand, sort of this grammatical component, but there's also sort of the rhetorical value for understanding how to speak and use language persuasively. And I do think that um, helping our students um, develop an ease with the language that they use, even if it's just the English, comes, I think, through at least having this point of comparison between two languages. Um, I think on the other hand, another feature of just studying languages is it does introduce sort of critical thinking. It has similarities to sort of mathematical reasoning, right? You have this very ordered system of communication, and you're trying to learn how the pieces fit together. And so it teaches sort of analysis, right? You got to take it apart. It's foreign to you. You don't have the same ease with English, so you don't get tripped up by, well, this is just how it works. You're like, I got to take the pieces apart and then put them back together to show the meaning. So you get the analysis component and then a synthesis. Um, and and so I think that that's really valuable in an education. And so yeah, I'm a big fan of encouraging the languages. My wife's bilingual, Spanish and English, and it's amazing to watch our son as he's thinking about one language versus the other, even at the age of 3. He definitely has tools that I did not have until I was even in college. So it definitely is massively, I think, enhancing for a student's critical thinking abilities and understanding of language, which is like our fundamental tool as humans that God has given us is language. Um,
Yeah.
so.
Help me
Yeah,
unpack the rhetoric piece a little bit.
yeah. So one of the things that's interesting with language is we have our pretty typical ways of talking, but then we always have this kind of register of thinking through exactly what we're saying in order to achieve a certain goal. And so rhetoric is this taking into account the situational moment, my audience, and my subject, and putting those things together in a powerful and influential way, if I'm persuading them, uh, I want them to take a particular action. How would I do that? And it's really interesting to look then at the history of not just Greek or Latin, but English.
Mhm.
Some of the great um, speakers. So we in my 11th grade class, we just finished going through the Civil War. And so you have two very powerful speakers, Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. And so this is where kind of, if you've studied sort of Greek or Latin, both Frederick Douglass and Lincoln they're reading scripture, they're reading Greek and Latin writers, and they are borrowing, stealing strategies. And so we read a Douglas speech where it's actually one of his later speeches during after the Reconstruction period. And he goes through the South and he comes back and gives a speech in Washington, D.C. as a celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation. And he's like, we have a long way to go. Like, and so one of the things he does rhetorically is he uses repetition. So he gets this right. And he has this phrase in this one paragraph where he just goes, tell me not, right? And what's interesting is he's changed the words around. That's not really exactly how most people would talk, right? I mean, we know exactly what he's saying, but tell me not. Instead of, he doesn't say, don't tell
Don't
me,
tell me.
don't tell me, don't tell me. He says, tell me not. And the refrain has power, but then also the changing up of the words has a power, it catches your attention because he's trying to get his audience a little bit off guard
Yeah,
so that they'll think about what he's saying and it'll register and he repeats it, repeats it, repeats it. So yeah, I think that there's this value in studying language to be like, yeah, to understand great speakers, but then understand how communication works, I think is kind of key.
awesome. And then it makes me think of Shakespeare. Like he's
Oh,
very
sure.
right. Repetition
Oh,
is his go-to.
absolutely. Yes.
Awesome. All right. And then quickly, can we touch on church history?
Oh,
Why is
yeah.
it important to study church history?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things is that most of the issues that we address in our own day don't come out of anywhere. They have a history,
Right?
but I think that also those who've gone before us have often wrestled with the tough questions. Um,
Nothing new
so
under the sun, right?
yeah, and so a lot of the issues that we see cropping up today are going to be issues that people have um, addressed, explored in the past. So, I think it's helpful to go back and see how were they reading scripture? How were they thinking about why is it important that Jesus is God again? Um, Reformation, right? What is faith and what is its significance? Um, why do we stand on scripture? I think that just if only for understanding what we believe, church history is valuable, aside from the fact that there are just some incredible stories. I think reading about Christians who've suffered before can be really strengthening. I know that it was for me to read about Christians who either died for what they believed or suffered for what they believed. And you're like, wow, okay, I'm not alone in this. So yeah, I think church history is really valuable for studying history in general, but for gaining some encouragement, for seeing how issues are unpacked and understood and why they're important. Those are at least a few things I think make church history really valuable.
Thank you so much. I know we did not do enough justice and diligence to church history, but I think you really underscore the importance of why it's important to study. You are such a wealth of information. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to share?
Um, you know what? Not really. I guess I'll make a quick plug that if parents are interested in the tutorials, I'd love to chat. I think it's something like, so I do it with Trinity House tutorials, but it's also something that parents can do with their kids. So it's a very it's something they can replicate. So I'd love to chat with folks. And I guess one of the other thing I would say maybe is a word of encouragement to conclude, like, so it's been over 20 years since I graduated from high school, and I can remember hard days. Um, not every day feels like we just had an amazing educational day. How powerful, look at all the things that we learned, right? I think that it's important for parents to remember that, right, the educational growth, the Christian growth happens sort of like it's little drips, it's a buildup, right? You're building towards something. And I think that maybe um, I guess I would just encourage parents to remember that. Um, and with our kids, like sometimes you're like, oh man, today was a rough day, but the Lord sustains us and it doesn't all happen in one day, right? Um, we're creatures that God has made that grow over time. Um, and maybe having some of those things that help you recapture, refresh your vision,
Mhm.
finding moments throughout the year where you look at the big picture. Where have we come from? Where are we going? Can be really helpful as well. Um, and I think maybe going along with remember it's the slow drips, pray a lot.
Yeah. No, I
Uh,
appreciate that. I think a constant theme in everything that we talked about, whether it was the biblical worldview or the church history or Greek, it's not about the end product. It's really about the process, right? Like we hear
yeah,
these cliches like, life is not a sprint, it's
yeah,
not about the destination, it's about the journey. And that's what I'm really hearing. So,
yeah,
just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, for like any parent who's just sitting there looking at grades and measuring growth on these assessments or these tools that public schools use because they have 20, 30 kids and they
yeah,
can't,
yeah,
do that one-on-one. I'd really encourage you just to spend some time with your kid and actually see what's
yeah,
happening. Like,
yeah, yeah,
you can't always measure learning just by a
yeah,
multiple choice quiz. So I really
absolutely,
appreciate you sharing that.
absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Justin. And
No,
I
thank you for
look,
having me.
of course, my pleasure.